heat in the New Mexico territory did not simply rise, it sat heavy and suffocating upon the earth, pressing the air out of lungs and the moisture out of the soil. It was noon in the year 1883, and the small town of San Felipe felt as though it were being slowly baked inside a kiln. The ground was a carpet of red dust that coated the hem of skirts and the leather of boots with equal indifference. Evelyn Hart stood on the porch of her small way station, a modest structure of timber and adobe that offered a bed and a meal to travelers passing along the Merchant Trail. She wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist, a gesture that had become as habitual as breathing. In the distance, the rhythmic clang of a hammer striking an anvil rang out from the blacksmith shop. It was the heartbeat of the town metal beaten into shape by fire and force. Evelyn often felt that she was the iron, and the territory was the hammer, but she was not yet sure what shape she was being beaten into. She was 32 years old, an age where the girlhood softness had been stripped away by the wind and the sun, replaced by the lean resilience of a willow branch. She was not beautiful in the way the porcelain dolls in the catalogs from the East were beautiful. Her skin was kissed by the sun, her hands were roughened by lye soap and rains, and her eyes held the quiet, guarded look of someone who had learned that hope was a dangerous thing to carry in an open pocket. Inside the common room, the air smelled of stale tobacco, floor wax, and the lingering acidity of burnt coffee. It was quiet, too quiet. A year ago, this room would have been filled with the booming laughter of Calvin Hart. Cal, with his big dreams and his terrible business sense. Cal, who believed that the West was a golden apple waiting to be plucked, rather than a cactus waiting to bleed you dry. He had been gone for 12 months. The official report said it was an accident. A wagon wheel had shattered on the rocky pass to the north, sending the freight and the driver tumbling into the ravine. They had brought him back in a pine box that cost Evelyn $6 she did not have. They said it was quick. Evelyn hoped it was. She hoped he hadn't laid there in the dust, looking up at the vast, indifferent blue sky, wondering why the fortune he chased had turned out to be a grave. She moved behind the wooden counter, her fingers brushing against the ledger that lay there. It was a thick book bound in black leather, its corners curled from use. To anyone else, it was just a record of guests, feed costs, and supplies. To Evelyn, it was a tombstone. She opened it to the back pages. There, in ink that looked like dried blood, were the numbers, the debts. Cal had borrowed. He had borrowed to build the new stable. He had borrowed to buy a better team of horses. He had borrowed it because Silas Rusk, the owner of the mercantile and the man who held the town's purse strings, had smiled and said, "Take your time, Cal. This land is going to pay off." Evelyn traced the line of the total sum. It was an amount that made her stomach turn cold, even in the midday heat. Since Cal died, she had worked herself to the bone. She cleaned the rooms herself. She groomed the guests' horses. She cooked the stew, and she mended the sheets until they were more patched than cloth. Every penny she earned went into Rusk's hand, and yet the number in the book seemed to grow rather than shrink. She closed the book with a sharp snap. Dwelling on the arithmetic of disaster would not scrub the floors. Evelyn picked up a basket of laundry and stepped out the back door, heading toward the washing line strung between two struggling cottonwood trees. The town of San Felipe was busy despite the heat. Men moved back and forth between the saloon and the general store, their spurs chiming like small, sinister bells. As she pinned a white sheet to the line, she felt the weight of eyes on her. It was a physical sensation, like a fly landing on her neck. She did not need to turn around to know what they were thinking. In a town this size, a widow holding onto prime land near the water source was an anomaly. She was a glitch in the natural order. "Give it up, Evelyn," the whispers seemed to say, carried on the dry wind. "A woman cannot run a station alone. A woman cannot hold the line." She saw Mrs. Gable walking on the other side of the street, clutching her parasol. The older woman offered a tight, pitying nod before looking away. It was the look one gave to a stray dog that was clearly starving, but which one had no intention of feeding. They waited for her to fail. It was not out of malice, exactly, but out of a grim expectation of reality. In the West, the weak broke, and without a husband, Evelyn was categorized as the weak. "Morning, Mrs. Hart," a voice croaked. Evelyn turned to see old Ben Kincaid hobbling past, his leather apron stiff with soot. He was the blacksmith, the source of the hammering. He was one of the few who looked at her and saw a person, not a tragedy. "Good morning, Mr. Kincaid," she replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hot one today. Hotter than the devil's skillet," Ben agreed, wiping his face with a rag. He paused, leaning on a fence post. "Saw Deputy Crow riding past your north fence this morning. I paused there for a good long while." Evelyn's grip on the laundry basket tightened until the wicker creaked. Harlan Crow. The deputy wore a badge, but he worked for Silas Rusk. Everyone knew it, but no one said it aloud. If Crow was watching her fence, he was measuring it for a coffin. "Let him watch," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "Looking is free." Ben looked at her, his eyes crinkled with worry beneath bushy gray brows. "Just be careful, girl. A wolf circles before he bites." He tipped his hat and moved on. Evelyn watched him go, then looked toward the north fence. The horizon shimmered in the heat haze. She felt small. She felt besieged. She reached into the deep pocket of her apron and her fingers closed around a small, cold object. She pulled it out. It was a single bead of turquoise, rough-hewn and pierced through the center, the color of a desert sky after rain. She had found it in Cal's coat pocket the day after the funeral. Cal was a man of simple tastes. He did not wear jewelry, and he had no interest in Indian trinkets, as he called them. Yet, this bead had been tucked deep in the lining, as if he had been hiding it, or protecting it. She rubbed the stone with her thumb. It was the only mystery Cal had left her, aside from the question of how a man who knew the trails so well had driven his wagon off a cliff. The stone felt grounding. It was solid. It was real. It was a piece of the earth that had endured millions of years of heat and pressure. "I will endure too," she whispered to the empty air. Needing supplies. Evelyn secured the house and walked down the main thoroughfare toward the mercantile. The dust puffed up in little clouds around her boots. The town smelled of horses' manure, sweat, and leather. It was a masculine scent, overpowering and aggressive. She passed the livery stable and the horse market. A group of men were gathered around a corral, bargaining over a roan mare. Their voices were loud, full of bluster and swagger. Evelyn kept her head down, intending to skirt the edge of the crowd. That was when she saw him. He was standing apart from the others, leaning against the railing in the shade of the stable overhang. He was not a white man. He was Dine, the Navajo. He was dressed in worn riding clothes, canvas trousers, and a loose shirt, but he wore moccasins that reached his calves, and his hair was pulled back, dark and severe. He was not old, perhaps the same age as her, but his face carried the weathered stillness of a canyon wall. Most of the native men who drifted into town were broken by the reservation life, looking for whiskey or work that paid in scraps. This man was different. He stood with a balanced weight, his shoulders relaxed but not slumped. He was watching the horse trading with an intensity that unsettled her. He wasn't looking at the animals' coats. He was looking at their legs, their lungs, the way they moved. He was measuring value, as if he felt her gaze. The man turned his head. His eyes met hers across the dust and the noise of the market. They were dark, unreadable, and completely devoid of the pity she saw in the eyes of her neighbors. He did not smile. He did not leer. He simply saw her. He registered her presence, assessed her as he had assessed the horses, checking for lameness, checking for strength, and then he turned his attention back to the corral. Evelyn felt a flush of heat that had nothing to do with the sun. It was the shock of being seen, really seen, without the filter of widow Hart. For a second, she was just a woman standing in the dust, and he was just a man in the shade. She hurried past, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She did not know who he was, but his presence felt like a shift in the air pressure, the drop in temperature before a storm. She reached the mercantile, Silas Rusk's domain. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully, a lie that masked the predatory nature of the business within. The interior was cool and smelled of dry goods, spices, and fabric. Silas Rusk was behind the counter. He was a man composed of soft edges and hard eyes. He smiled when he saw her, a stretching of lips that showed too many teeth. "Mrs. Hart," Rusk purred. "I was not expecting you until the 1st of the month. I needed flour and coffee. Mr. Rusk," Evelyn said, placing her basket on the counter. She kept her voice flat. "Put it on my tab." Rusk tutted softly, opening his own ledger. It was a twin to the one she hated, but his was larger, pristine, and authoritative. "The tab is getting heavy. Evelyn, very heavy. I worry about you carrying such a load all by yourself." "I am managing," she said. "Are you?" Rusk leaned forward. "There is no shame in admitting that the burden is too great. I have made you a fair offer for the land, more than fair, considering the situation." "The land is not for sale," Evelyn said. The words were automatic now. "The water rights alone would clear your debt." Rusk pressed, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You could go back east, find a new husband. A woman like you shouldn't be drying up out here in the desolate wastes." "A woman like me?" Evelyn asked, meeting his gaze. "You mean a woman who pays her bills?" Rusk's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold irritation. "A woman who owes me $3,000. Evelyn, the interest compounds next week, if you cannot pay the installment." He let the sentence hang in the air, unfinished but perfectly clear. "I will pay," Evelyn said. "I always pay." "We shall see," Rusk said, turning back to his shelves. Evelyn took her meager supplies and walked out. Her hands were shaking. She hid them in the folds of her skirt. $3,000. It was a fortune. It was an impossibility. When Cal had first taken the loan, she thought it was $800, then $1,200. Now. The numbers in Rusk's book seemed to breed in the dark. She walked back to the way station, her head high, ignoring the dust that coated her throat. She would not run. She would not sell. This land was the only thing Cal had left her that was real. If she sold it, she admitted that his life and hers meant nothing. That evening, the wind picked up. It came howling off the desert floor, rattling the loose shutters of the inn. There were no guests tonight. The rooms were empty, the beds cold. Evelyn locked the heavy oak door and dropped the iron bar into place. It felt like a flimsy defense against the vastness of the night. She sat at the small table in the kitchen, the oil lamp casting a flickering yellow circle of light. The black ledger sat before her. Beside it lay the turquoise bead. She opened the book again. She stared at the signature at the bottom of the last entry, dated 2 days before Cal died. Calvin Hart? She traced the letters. It looked like his hand. The loops of the C, the sharp cross of the T. But there was something wrong with it. The pressure of the pen was too heavy. Cal wrote with a light, dashing hand, always in a hurry. This signature was dug into the paper, deliberate and slow. Had he been afraid? Had he been forced, or had he simply been tired, worn down by the same wind that was currently trying to tear the roof off her house? The wind shrieked outside, a long, mournful note that sounded like a voice crying out in a language she did not understand. It sounded like a threat. Evelyn looked at the bead. The blue-green stone seemed to glow faintly in the lamplight. It was a piece of the sky, buried in the earth. "What did you get us into, Cal?" she whispered. She felt the walls closing in. The debt was a noose, and Silas Rusk was tightening it inch by inch. The town was watching, waiting for the chair to be kicked out from under her. But as the wind battered the house, Evelyn Hart did not weep. She picked up the pen, dipped it in the inkwell, and wrote the date in her own ledger. She recorded the purchase of flour and coffee. She balanced the column. She was still here. The house was still standing. She blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. In the silence that followed, she thought of the man at the horse market, the Navajo warrior with the eyes that weighed souls. He had looked at her and seen strength, or perhaps just stubbornness. Outside, the coyote howled, answering the wind. Evelyn went to her room, placed the revolver on the nightstand beside her Bible, and lay down to wait for the morning. She would keep the land. She just didn't know how much longer she could keep her soul. The morning sun did not rise gently over San Philip. It broke the horizon like a hammer cracking a stone, spilling harsh, blinding light across the red dirt. The storm from the previous night had passed, leaving the air scrubbed clean and deceptively still. But the tension that remained was thick enough to choke on. Evelyn Hart was already awake. In truth, she had not slept. The image of the ledger and the cold weight of the turquoise bead had kept her company through the long, dark hours. She was sweeping the porch, the rhythmic swish-swish of the broom acting as a fragile barrier against the chaos she felt impending, when the sound of approaching horses shattered the morning quiet. It was not the casual trot of a traveler looking for water. It was the heavy, deliberate plodding of men who owned the ground they rode on. Evelyn stopped sweeping. She leaned the broom against the rough adobe wall and wiped her hands on her apron. She knew who it was before she saw them. Silas Rusk rode a tall bay gelding, his suit immaculately pressed despite the heat, a stark contrast to the dust-coated reality of the territory. Beside him rode Deputy Harlan Crow. Crow was a man built of gristle and bad intentions, wearing a tin star that looked dull against his sweat-stained shirt. His hand rested casually, almost lovingly, on the grip of his revolver. They pulled up to the hitching rail but did not dismount immediately. They sat there, looking down at her. It was a power play, old as time. The rider above, the pedestrian below. "Good morning, Mrs. Hart," Rusk said. His voice was smooth, like oil slicking over gravel. "Mr. Rusk," Evelyn replied. She did not offer a greeting to Crow. "To what do I owe the honor so early in the day?" Crow swung down from his saddle, his boots hitting the wood of the porch with a heavy thud that made the loose boards groan. He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. It was thick, official parchment, bearing the seal of the territorial court. "No honor, ma'am," Crow said, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth beneath his mustache. "Just business." He thrust the paper toward her. Evelyn did not take it. She let him hold it out in the air between them, forcing him to hold his arm awkward and extended. After a long moment, Crow's smirk faltered, and he slapped the paper down onto the porch railing. "Notice of foreclosure," Crow barked, his voice loud enough to carry to the blacksmith shop across the way. "On behalf of Silas Rusk and the San Felipe Mercantile, you are in default, Mrs. Hart. Default on the loan principal, default on the interest, and default on the penalties." Evelyn looked at the paper. The words swam before her eyes. Seizure. Forfeit. Immediate possession. "I have until the harvest," Evelyn said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to iron it flat. "Cal said the agreement was until the harvest." Rusk chuckled softly. He dismounted now, dusting off his trousers. "Cal said a lot of things. Evelyn, he was a man of great optimism. But the ledger speaks a different language. The debt is due. Every penny." "How much?" Evelyn asked. With the late fees added as of this morning, Rusk made a show of calculating in his head, though Evelyn knew he had the number memorized down to the decimal. $3,420. The number hit her like a physical blow. It was impossible. It was more money than a working man saw in 10 years. "That is a lie," Evelyn whispered. "It is arithmetic." Rusk corrected. "You have 3 days. 3 days to pay in full, or the sheriff comes to escort you off the property. We will take the land. We will take the station. We will take the horses, even that sway-backed mare you are so fond of. You cannot take the house," Evelyn said, stepping forward. "My mother built this house, and your husband mortgaged it." Crow sneered. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, smelling of stale whiskey and onions. "Face it, widow, you're done. Pack your rags." Rusk pulled a small, leather-bound book from his saddlebag. It was the twin to the one Evelyn kept, but this one was the master copy. I brought the record, just so you cannot claim ignorance. Look here. He opened the book and laid it on the railing next to the foreclosure notice. He pointed a manicured finger at the bottom of a column of figures. Evelyn looked. She forced her eyes to focus. She saw the list of supplies: lumber, nails, grain, 4 saddles, 50 pounds of coffee, and at the bottom, the signature Calvin Hart. But as she stared, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The entry for the 50 pounds of coffee and the 4 saddles was dated October the 12th. Cal had died on October the 10th. A cold chill raced down Evelyn's spine, sharper than any winter wind. She leaned closer. The signature looked like Cal's. The loop of the C was right, but the ink was pressed deep into the paper. Cal wrote quickly, his hand flying across the page as if he couldn't wait to be done with the boring business of numbers. This signature was heavy, deliberate, drawn, not written, and the date. He was dead, Evelyn said. Her voice was barely audible. What's that? Crow asked. Leaning in, Evelyn looked up, her eyes blazing with a sudden, terrifying clarity. This entry, October the 12th. Cal died 2 days before this. He was on the ground. Rusk did not flinch. He did not blink. He merely smiled, a sad, patronizing smile that made Evelyn want to scream. Grief does terrible things to the memory. Evelyn, Cal came in that morning before he left for the pass. I wrote the date down later. A clerical error on the date, perhaps, but the goods were taken. The signature is his. It is a forgery, Evelyn said, her voice rising. You wrote this. You added to the debt after he was gone. Careful, woman, Crow warned, his hand dropping to his gun belt. Accusing a respected businessman of fraud. That is a quick way to find yourself in a cell before the 3 days are up. The commotion had drawn a crowd. In San Philip, entertainment was scarce, and the misery of others was a spectator sport. People had drifted out of the saloon and the shops, forming a loose semicircle around the porch. They watched with a mixture of curiosity and callousness. Looks like the widow is finally going under, a man in a dusty coat muttered to his neighbor. Shame, the neighbor replied, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. But a woman can't hold land like that. It ain't natural. Marion Boone pushed her way through the front of the crowd. Marion owned the saloon. A woman with hair dyed the color of a copper penny and a heart that had been broken so many times she had reinforced it with iron. She rushed up the steps and placed a hand on Evelyn's arm. Evelyn, Marion whispered urgently. Don't fight them here, not like this. He forged it. Marion, Evelyn said, her voice tight with hysteria. Look at the date. He's stealing the land. Marion squeezed her arm. Hard enough to bruise. I know. Everyone knows Rusk has wanted this spring since the day you married Cal. But you cannot win a shouting match with a man who owns the judge. I will not let him take it, Evelyn said. She reached for the ledger on the railing, intending to tear the page out, to show the crowd the lie. Crow moved faster than a snake. He grabbed Evelyn's wrist, his fingers digging into her flesh. That is property of the mercantile, Crow shouted. He twisted her arm, forcing a cry of pain from her lips. You want to steal now? Widow, is that it? Maybe we should just lock you up today and save you the trouble. Let go of me, Evelyn struggled, but Crow was strong, and he enjoyed the power he held in his grip. Give me the keys to the station, Crow demanded, pulling her closer. We are seizing the asset now to prevent damages. Evelyn gasped, the pain in her wrist radiating up to her shoulder. She looked at the crowd. They watched. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting their feet, but no one stepped forward. Fear of Rusk, fear of Crow, or simply the apathy of the frontier held them back. I said, give me the keys. Crow raised his other hand, not to strike, but to intimidate. A heavy palm hovering near her face. A shadow fell over them. It did not come from a cloud. It came from a man who had stepped onto the porch so quietly that not even the boards had creaked. A hand, brown and scarred, clamped onto Crow's wrist, the one holding Evelyn. It did not strike. It merely held. But the grip was absolute. It was the grip of a man who could hold a wild Mustang still. Crow froze. He looked up. Kai Yazzie stood there. Up close, he was taller than he had looked from the street. His presence was a dense gravity. He wore a simple cotton shirt and a leather vest, dust on his shoulders, and a knife sheathed at his belt. He carried no gun. "Do not touch her," Kai said. His voice was not loud. It was a low rumble, like the sound of shifting tectonic plates deep underground. It was not a request. Crow's face turned a mottled shade of red. He tried to yank his hand away, but Kai's grip did not falter. Evelyn felt the pressure on her own wrist vanish as Crow was forced to let go of her to deal with the new threat. She stumbled back, Marion catching her. Evelyn rubbed her wrist, staring at the Navajo warrior who had placed himself between her and the law. "You!" Crow spat. "The stray dog from the horse market." Kai released Crow's arm with a shove that sent the deputy stumbling back 2 steps. Kai did not assume a fighting stance. He simply stood, relaxed, his hands hanging loose at his sides, near his knives. But his eyes were locked on Crow. "This is official town business. Redskin," Crow snarled, his hand hovering over his gun again. "You interfere with a deputy, and I will leave you for the buzzards. You think you can make laws here?" "I see no law," Kai said. His English was clear, accented with the cadence of the dying but precise. "I see a man twisting a woman's arm. She is a debtor." Rusk spoke up from the steps, his voice shrill with indignation. "She owes every penny, and she cannot pay. That makes her property forfeit." Crow regained his balance, his chest heaving. "Step aside, Indian, unless you want a hole in your chest," the crowd murmured. This was dangerous. A native man standing up to a white deputy in the New Mexico territory usually ended in only one way, a body dragged through the street. "Crow," Rusk warned, sensing the volatility. "We do not need a shooting. Not yet." "He put his hands on me," Crow hissed. "A savage puts his hands on a white man." Kai ignored the slur. He turned his gaze to Evelyn. For a second, the rest of the world vanished. He looked at her bruising wrist, then at her eyes. There was a question in his look, and an offer. He turned back to Rusk. "How much?" Kai asked. Rusk blinked. "Excuse me? The debt," Kai said. "How much is the debt?" Rusk laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. $3,420. "Do you have that in your pouch? Boy, did you sell enough blankets today?" The racism was casual, easy. The crowd tittered nervously. Kai reached into his vest. Crow flinched, drawing his revolver halfway out of the holster. But Kai did not pull a weapon. He pulled out a small leather pouch. He did not open it. He simply held it. "I will pay for it," Kai said. Silence slammed into the street. The blacksmith's hammer stopped in the distance. The wind seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn gasped. "No!" She stepped forward, pushing past Marion. "No, I do not know you. I will not trade one debt for another." Her mind raced. Being saved by Rusk meant losing her land. Being saved by a stranger, a man she had seen only once, felt like losing her agency. She had fought to stand on her own 2 feet since Cal died. She would not be bought. Kai looked at her. "I am not buying you, Mrs. Hart." He turned back to Rusk. "I will pay the debt, but not here, and not blindly." "Cash is cash," Rusk said, his eyes greedy, fixated on the pouch. He didn't believe there were $3,000 in there, but the possibility intrigued him. "Hand it over, and I will write a receipt." "No," Kai said. "No," Rusk bristled. "I will pay," Kai said, his voice carrying to the back of the crowd. "But first, I want to see the book, the full ledger. I want to see every entry, every date, every signature. And I want to do it in the light of day, inside your store, where witnesses can see." Rusk's eyes narrowed. "You question my bookkeeping. I question a man who charges for saddles after a man is dead." Kai said. The crowd began to whisper. The seed of doubt had been planted. Evelyn felt a strange sensation in her chest, hope, terrified, and fragile. "This is ridiculous." Crow spat. "I say we will arrest them both." Him for disturbing the peace, her for fraud. "Let him do it," a voice called out from the crowd. It was old Ben Kincaid. "If the money is real, Rusk, take it, unless you don't want us seeing the pages." Rusk looked at the crowd. He saw the shift. If he refused, he looked guilty. If he agreed, he believed he could still win. After all, who would take the word of a Navajo over a pillar of the community? And the ledger was altered. But Rusk was arrogant enough to believe his penmanship was flawless. "Fine," Rusk sneered. He looked at Evelyn and then at Kai with unparalleled contempt. A woman and an Indian. The two weakest things in this town. You want to play merchant, come to the store at noon. Bring your money. But if you are $1 short, or if that pouch is filled with rocks, I will have Crow hang you from the water tower. Rusk mounted his horse. Noon. He wheeled the horse around and trotted off. Crow holstered his gun, spat on the ground near Kai's moccasins, and followed, glaring back over his shoulder. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed that there was no blood, but excited for the second act at noon. Evelyn stood trembling on the porch. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her knees weak. She looked at Kai. He was putting the pouch back into his vest. "Why?" Evelyn asked. Her voice was hoarse. "Who are you?" Kai turned to her. Up close, she saw the lines around his eyes, the dust in his pores. He did not look like a savior from a storybook. He looked like a man who had walked a long, hard road. "My name is Kai Yazzie," he said. "I cannot pay you back," Evelyn said, clutching her wrist. "I have nothing. If you pay him, you own the land. You become Rusk." "I do not want the land," Kai said. "And I do not want to become Rusk." "Then why?" He stepped closer. The scent of sage and wood smoke clung to him. He lowered his voice so that only she and Marion could hear. "I knew Cal," Kai said. Evelyn froze. "You knew my husband." "He did a kindness for my family once, a debt of honor. I meant to repay him." Kai looked toward the horizon where the pass lay. "I was too late for him. I am not too late for you." Evelyn stared at him. The turquoise bead in her pocket seemed to burn against her thigh. "The ledger is a lie," Evelyn whispered, tears finally pricking her eyes. "He wrote in it. I saw it. But how can we prove it? Rusk owns the town." Kai looked at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. He did not offer false comfort. He did not smile. "We do not need to prove it to the judge," Kai said softly. "We need to prove it to the people. Rusk feeds on fear. If we show them he bleeds ink like anyone else. He breaks." He glanced at the bead shape pressing against her apron pocket. "Bring the stone," he said. Evelyn's hand went to her pocket. "How did you know?" "I gave it to him," Kai said, "years ago." The revelation hung in the air. The connection between them snapped into place, a thread spun by Cal, tying this stranger to her fate. At noon, Kai said, "We go to the store. If that ledger is a lie, Mrs. Hart, we will not just argue it. We will tear it apart right in front of their faces." He nodded once to Marion, then turned and walked down the steps, disappearing around the corner of the station before Evelyn could say another word. Evelyn stood there, the wind whipping her skirts around her legs. Marion put an arm around her shoulders. "Well," Marion said, letting out a long breath, "out of the frying pan, into the fire. But at least this fire has a name." Evelyn looked at the dust where Kai had stood. She was terrified. She was exhausted. But for the first time in a year, she was not alone. She reached into her pocket and squeezed the turquoise bead until the sharp edges dug into her palm. "Noon," Evelyn whispered. She turned and went inside to wash the dust from her face. If she was going to war, she would do it with her head held high. The heat of the afternoon did not simply radiate from the sun. It seemed to rise up from the scorched earth itself, baking the soles of Evelyn's boots through the leather stirrups. They had left San Philip behind an hour ago, the town reducing to a smudge of brown dust against the vast, indifferent blue of the horizon. Evelyn rode the sway-backed mare, a stubborn beast named Bess, who was the only horse Rusk hadn't thought worth seizing immediately. Beside her, Kai Yazzie rode a paint horse that moved with a fluid, conserving energy that made Bess look clumsy by comparison. They were heading north, toward the jagged scar in the earth known as Dead Man's Pass, where Cal's wagon had gone over the edge. It was a desperate gamble. After the confrontation on the porch, Rusk had granted them the 3 days legally required by the foreclosure notice, smug in his certainty that no amount of scavenging would produce $3,000. But Kai had insisted that money was not the answer. The answer lay in the dirt where Cal had died. "Drink," Kai said. It was not an order. He did not look at her as he said it, nor did his voice carry the imperious tone Cal sometimes used when he was stressed. It was a statement of necessity, spoken as he uncorked his canteen and took a measured sip. Evelyn reached for her own water skin. Her throat felt like it was coated in sandpaper. "We are burning daylight," she rasped, wiping her mouth. "The pass is still 10 miles out. The horse needs to breathe," Kai replied calmly. He slowed his mount to a walk. "If you run her into the ground now, you will be walking home in the dark." Evelyn pulled on the reins, slowing Bess. She felt a flash of irritation, not at him, but at her own lack of foresight. She was a woman of the house, of the ledger and the broom. She knew how to stretch a sack of flour for a month. But out here, in the anvil of the desert, she felt dangerously incompetent. "You do not have to do this," Evelyn said, the words breaking out of her before she could check them. "You paid the debt of honor when you stood up to Crow. You do not owe me a ride into hell." Kai looked at her then. The shadow of his hat brim hid his eyes, but she saw the set of his jaw. "I am not doing this for the debt anymore, Mrs. Hart." "Then why?" "Because a man who preys on widows is a wolf," Kai said, "and wolves do not stop at one kill. They eat until there is nothing left." Evelyn looked away, staring at the spine of the mountains. "Cal thought this land was paradise," she said softly. "He wrote to me in Missouri. He said the West was golden. He said a man could breathe here." "He was right," Kai said. "A man can breathe, but he must also know when to hold his breath." He was too soft for this place, Evelyn admitted, the truth tasting bitter on her tongue. He trusted everyone. He thought a handshake meant a contract. He thought Silas Rusk was his friend. "Trust is not a weakness," Kai said, "but in the wrong hands, it is a weapon." They rode in silence for another hour. The terrain grew rougher, the soft dust giving way to shale and jagged rock. The vegetation turned sparse, twisted mesquite and cacti that looked like gnarled hands reaching for mercy. Ahead, a small structure appeared, a ramshackle lean-to built next to a natural rock cistern that held a few inches of murky water. It was a known stopping point for freighters. A mule was tied to the single hitching post, and a man was bent over its hoof with a rasp. "That is Ben Kincaid," Evelyn said, shielding her eyes. "The blacksmith. What is he doing this far out?" "Shoeing a lame beast, by the looks of it," Kai said. They rode up to the structure. Old Ben straightened up, his back cracking audibly. He squinted at them, wiping his blackened hands on his leather apron. "Mrs. Hart," Ben said, nodding. He looked at Kai with a guarded curiosity, but no hostility. "And the man who made Crow swallow his own teeth. I heard about the show this morning." "We are looking for the truth, Ben," Evelyn said, dismounting. Her legs felt like jelly. "About Cal," Ben sighed and spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "The truth is a scarce commodity in San Philip. Evelyn, usually it costs more than gold." "We know Rusk forged the ledger," Kai said, stepping down from his horse. He moved with a quiet confidence that seemed to put Ben at ease. "We need to know who helped him." Ben looked at the mule, then back at Evelyn. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his thinning gray hair. "I liked Cal. He paid when he could, and he apologized when he couldn't. That counts for something." He paused, looking around as if the cactus might have ears. "The day Cal died," Ben said, his voice dropping to a rumble, "Crow came by my shop. Said he was riding patrol to the south. Needed his gelding shod." "South," Evelyn frowned. Cal died in the North Pass. Exactly, Ben said. Crow claimed he was miles away, but I saw him later that afternoon, riding back into town from the North Ridge. His horse was lathered, and there was red clay packed in the new shoes I had just put on, the kind of clay you only find up near the canyon rim. Evelyn felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. He was there. He was watching, Ben corrected. Or worse, when he heard about the accident, he didn't look surprised. Evelyn, he looked relieved. He lied about his alibi. Kai said, it wasn't a question. He lied, Ben confirmed. But you didn't hear it from me. I have to live in that town, and Crow has a long memory and a heavy pistol. Thank you, Ben, Evelyn said, reaching out to touch the old man's arm. This helps. Be careful, girl, Ben muttered, turning back to his mule. You are poking a rattlesnake with a short stick. They watered the horses and pressed on. The sun began to dip, painting the sky in violent shades of purple and bruised orange. The temperature dropped with a shocking speed. The heat of the day evaporated, leaving a biting chill that cut through Evelyn's thin cotton blouse. They made camp in a small depression shielded by a ridge of sandstone. It wasn't much, but it broke the wind. Kai built a small fire, feeding it with dried mesquite roots he had gathered. The flames were small, keeping their signature low. Evelyn sat near the fire, wrapping her arms around herself. She watched Kai tend to the horses. He moved with a tenderness she hadn't expected, checking their hooves, rubbing down their flanks. You have good hands, she said. Kai paused, then walked over to the fire. He unrolled his bedroll, a thick wool blanket woven with geometric patterns. He held it out to her. Take it, he said. I cannot take your blanket, Evelyn protested, though her teeth were beginning to chatter. You will freeze. I have the fire, Kai said. He sat down, not opposite her, but beside her, close enough to share warmth, but leaving a respectful distance of a few inches between them. And I am used to the cold. The desert at night is a test. Evelyn hesitated, then took the blanket. It smelled of wood smoke, horse, and sage. She wrapped it around her shoulders, and the warmth was immediate and comforting. Thank you, she whispered. She looked at him, in the flickering light. The sharp angles of his face were softened. He was staring into the flames, his expression contemplative. Ben said Crow was there, Evelyn said quietly. If Crow caused the accident, then it is murder, not just fraud. Men like Rusk do not get their own hands dirty, Kai said. They pay men like Crow to do the heavy lifting. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond the ring of light. Kai's hand moved instantly to the knife at his belt. He didn't turn his head, but his entire body went rigid, coiled like a spring. Easy, a whispery voice called out. Don't shoot or throw. Whatever you do. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was a young man, barely 20, with ink-stained fingers and a face pale with terror. Thomas, Evelyn gasped. It was Thomas Vale, the young clerk who worked in Rusk's mercantile. He looked as though he had run the entire 10 miles from town. I cannot stay long, Thomas panted, crouching down near the fire but looking over his shoulder. Crow knows I left the store. If he catches me. Why are you here, Thomas? Evelyn asked. The ledger, Thomas said, his voice trembling. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled scrap of paper. I heard you this morning. I heard what you said about the dates. He handed the paper to Evelyn. It was a page torn from a pocket notebook. On it were columns of numbers, hastily scribbled. Rusk keeps 2 books, Thomas whispered. The big one on the counter. That is the one he shows the bank. But he keeps a small one locked in the safe floor. These are the real codes. He marks the accounts he plans to foreclose on with a red X months before the debt is due. Evelyn looked at the paper. Next to the name Hart, there was a date, August the 1st. August. Evelyn looked up. Cal was alive in August. Rusk was planning to take the land while Cal was still alive. He wanted the water, Tomas said. He has a buyer from the railroad coming next month. They need a water station. Your spring is the only reliable source for 20 miles. Rusk promised them he would have the deed by the end of the month. He killed him, Evelyn said. The realization was not a shock anymore. It was a heavy stone settling in her gut. He killed Cal because Cal wouldn't sell. I didn't say that, Tomas said, backing away. I know about the books. Rusk is going to ruin you. Mrs. Hart, he destroys everything he touches. I couldn't sleep thinking about it. Thank you, Tomas, Kai said. His voice was gentle, surprising the boy. You are a brave man. I am a coward, Tomas said bitterly. That is why I'm running away tonight. I am taking the stage to Santa Fe. I won't be here when Rusk finds out. He vanished into the dark as quickly as he had appeared. Evelyn sat staring at the fire, the scrap of paper clutched in her hand. The betrayal was absolute. Cal hadn't just been unlucky. He had been hunted. She shivered, and this time it wasn't from the cold. Kai moved. He shifted his position, turning to face her. He reached out and, very slowly, placed his hand over hers, the one clutching the paper. His palm was warm, rough with calluses, but his touch was incredibly light. We have the motive, Kai said. Now we need the method. Evelyn looked down at his hand covering hers. She didn't pull away. She turned her hand over, interlacing her fingers with his. It was a bold move, one that surprised even her. I found something, she said. With her free hand, she dug into her pocket and pulled out the turquoise bead. She held it up to the firelight. The blue stone caught the orange glow, shining like a captured star. I found this in Cal's pocket, she said. He never wore jewelry. I never understood why he had it. Kai's eyes widened slightly. He reached out and touched the bead with his free hand, brushing her fingertips as he did so. The sensation sent a jolt of electricity through her. This is a life bead, Kai said softly. Among my people, the dying, we give this to someone who has saved a life. It binds the giver and the receiver. It says, your breath is my breath. Cal saved someone, Evelyn asked. 3 years ago, Kai said, his eyes locking onto hers. There was a skirmish near the border. A young Dine scout was shot, left for dead in a dry wash. A white freighter found him. Instead of leaving him, or finishing him off, the freighter washed his wound, gave him water, and hid him in his wagon until the soldiers passed. Evelyn's lips parted. That was you. I was young, Kai said. And foolish. I thought I could fight the world alone. Cal Hart taught me that even a stranger can be a brother. He squeezed her hand. I gave him that bead. I told him if he ever needed aid, he only had to ask. He never asked. But now, I'm answering the call he could not make. The distance between them seemed to vanish, in the vast, empty silence of the desert. Under a canopy of stars that looked like spilled diamonds, Evelyn felt a profound sense of safety she hadn't felt in a year. Kai was not just a hired gun or a chance encounter. He was a part of Cal's life she had never known, a legacy of kindness returning to protect her. She leaned in slightly, drawn by the warmth of him, by the steady rhythm of his breathing. Kai did not pull back. He watched her, his dark eyes searching her face, waiting for her to signal that this was wanted. You are not alone in this fight. Evelyn, he whispered. He used her first name. It sounded like a prayer on his lips. I know, she whispered back. For a moment, the world narrowed down to the space between their faces. The air crackled with a tension that was terrifying and exhilarating. Then, a sound shattered the night. Crack thwump! A bullet struck the sandstone rock inches from Evelyn's head, spraying grit and sparks into the air. The report of the rifle echoed a split second later, rolling off the canyon walls like thunder. Kai moved instantly. He shoved Evelyn down, covering her body with his own, pressing her into the dirt behind the meager cover of the rocks. Stay down, he hissed. He kicked dirt over the fire, plunging them into darkness. Another shot rang out, whining overhead. They followed us, Evelyn gasped, her face pressed against the dusty earth, the smell of Kai's leather vest filling her senses. They do not want us to reach the pass. Kai whispered, his voice hard as flint. "The game has changed. Evelyn." He drew his knife, the metal gleaming faintly in the starlight. "It is no longer about the ledger," he said. "Now, it is about survival." Evelyn gripped the turquoise bead in one hand and the scrap of paper in the other. Her heart hammered against her ribs, echoing the rhythm of the war drums she had heard in stories. She looked at Kai, lying protectively over her, his eyes scanning the darkness for the muzzle flash. They were hunted, but as she felt the weight of him shielding her, Evelyn knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would not die on her knees. The echo of the rifle shot was still bouncing off the canyon walls when Kai moved. He did not scramble or panic. He moved with the fluid, deadly precision of a mountain lion. He grabbed Evelyn by the arm, not roughly, but with a grip that brooked no argument, and hauled her toward the deeper shadows of the rocks. "The horses!" Evelyn gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "We cannot leave them." "We will not," Kai said. His voice was low, cutting through the ringing in her ears. He whistled, a sharp, mimicking cry of a nighthawk. The paint horse, trained by a hand that understood the language of silence, reared its head and bolted, not away from them, but deeper into the cut of the ravine, pulling Evelyn's mare. Bess, along with it. "Move!" Kai commanded. They ran. The ground was treacherous, a minefield of loose shale and twisting roots hidden by the dark. Behind them, the sound of shouting erupted. Heavy boots crunched on the gravel. There were at least 3 men, maybe 4. They were not moving with the caution of lawmen. They were moving with the aggression of hired killers. "There, by the ridge," a voice shouted. It was not Crow. It was a rougher voice, thick with the accent of the borderlands. A bullet whined past Evelyn's ear, close enough that she felt the displacement of air. She stumbled, her skirt catching on a mesquite thorn. Kai was there instantly, his arm hooking around her waist to keep her upright without slowing their pace. "Up ahead," Kai breathed. "The slot canyon. If we make the gap, they cannot follow on horseback." They reached the narrow fissure in the sandstone wall. It was a jagged wound in the earth, barely wide enough for 2 people to walk abreast. The horses had already squeezed through, their instincts driving them to cover. As Kai pushed Evelyn into the gap, she looked back. A silhouette appeared on the ridge, outlined against the stars. The man raised a rifle. Evelyn did not think. She acted on a primal instinct that she did not know she possessed. Her hand closed around a jagged rock the size of a fist lying on a ledge at shoulder height. With a grunt of effort, she hurled it, not at the man, she was too far for that, but at the loose scree slope directly beneath his horse's hooves. The rock struck the shale with a loud clack. The horse, already skittish from the gunfire, spooked at the sudden noise beneath it. It reared violently, whinnying in terror. The rifleman cursed, fighting to stay in the saddle as his shot went wild, burying itself harmlessly in the dirt 10 feet to the left. "Good arm," Kai muttered, a flicker of admiration in his tone. He shoved her deeper into the darkness of the slot canyon. They scrambled over boulders and squeezed through tight turns, the walls rising higher and higher until the sky was nothing but a thin ribbon of indigo far above. They ran until their lungs burned and the sounds of pursuit faded into the distance. The hired guns would not follow them in here. The canyon was a maze, a death trap for anyone who did not know the way. And in the dark, it was suicide. But the night had other weapons. As they slowed to a walk, the air pressure dropped rapidly. The wind, which had been howling at the canyon mouth, died abruptly. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with violence. "The storm," Kai said, looking up at the sliver of sky where the stars were being swallowed by black clouds. "It is breaking. In the high desert, rain was not a blessing. It was a hammer. And in a slot canyon, it was a killer. We need high ground," Evelyn said, remembering Cal's warnings about flash floods. "If the water comes—" "There," Kai pointed. About 20 feet up the canyon wall, a natural shelf jutted out, protected by an overhang of rock. It was a shallow cave, barely deep enough for them to sit out of the wind, but it was high enough to be safe from the floodwaters. They scrambled up the rough rock face. Kai went first, pulling Evelyn up the steep sections. His strength was not showy. It was absolute. When his hand gripped hers, she felt anchored. They reached the shelf just as the heavens opened. It did not start with a few drops. It started as a deluge, a curtain of water falling with such intensity that it roared. Lightning flashed, illuminating the canyon in stark, terrifying bursts of blue-white light. Thunder crashed almost instantly, shaking the very stone beneath them. They huddled in the back of the shallow recess. The temperature plummeted. Evelyn was shivering violently, her clothes damp from sweat and the driving spray of the rain. "Come here," Kai said. He did not ask this time. He moved to the corner of the shelf where the wall retained some of the day's heat and pulled her down beside him. He opened his leather vest and wrapped the wool blanket which he had managed to grab from his saddlebag before the horses bolted further up the trail around both of them. Evelyn stiffened for a second, the propriety of the town warring with the reality of survival, but the cold was biting, and the warmth radiating from him was the only thing keeping her teeth from chattering out of her head. She relaxed, leaning into him. They sat shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, under the rough wool. The smell of the rain hitting the hot dust mixed with the scent of sage and the iron tang of adrenaline. "You are bleeding," Kai said softly. Evelyn looked down. In the flash of lightning, she saw a dark smear on her forearm where the mesquite thorns had torn through her sleeve. "It is nothing," she said. "It is not nothing." Kai reached into his pouch and pulled out a small strip of clean cloth and a flask of water. In the dimness, he took her arm. His movements were incredibly gentle. He poured a little water over the scratch to clean it. The water was cold, stinging, but his fingers were warm. He dabbed the wound dry. He did not hurry. He treated the scratch on her arm with the same reverence one might treat a religious artifact. Evelyn watched his face in the intermittent flashes of light. His expression was focused, his eyes lowered. "You saved us back there," Kai said, his voice a low rumble against the noise of the storm. "With the rock, most people would have frozen." "I am tired of freezing," Evelyn whispered. "I am tired of waiting for men to decide if I live or die." Kai looked up. His face was inches from hers. The blanket created a small, private world, shutting out the storm, the debt, and the danger. "You are not like the women in the town," Kai said. "You have the spirit of the desert. You endure." Evelyn felt a tremble go through her that had nothing to do with the cold. She looked at his mouth, then up to his eyes. The desire that flared between them was not the frantic lust of a saloon romance. It was a slow, burning coal, deep and terrifyingly hot. She saw him lean in, just a fraction of an inch. She did not pull back. Her breath hitched. She wanted him to kiss her. She wanted to feel something other than grief and fear. But Kai stopped. He closed his eyes for a second, a muscle feathering in his jaw, and then he pulled back, just enough to break the spell. He finished tying the cloth around her arm. He respected her too much to take advantage of her fear. He respected her grief too much to confuse it with gratitude. "Rest, Evelyn," he said, his voice rough. "The water will rise soon. We must wait for dawn." He did not move away, but the boundary was re-established. Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the steady beat of his heart against her ear. Below them, the roar of the flash flood began, a churning river of mud and debris tearing through the canyon floor where they had walked only minutes before. Nature was cleaning the slate. Evelyn closed her eyes and, for the first time since Cal died, she slept without dreaming of the ledger. Morning broke with a clarity that hurt the eyes. The storm had scrubbed the sky a brilliant, hard blue. The canyon floor was a muddy ruin, but the water had receded. They found the horses waiting further up the box canyon, skittish but unharmed. They rode out in silence, the events of the night hanging between them like an unspoken promise. They reached the North Pass by mid-morning. It was a desolate place, a narrow trail cut into the side of a cliff that dropped 500 feet into a rocky ravine. "Here," Evelyn said, pulling Bess to a halt. She pointed to a sharp bend in the trail. The sheriff said the wheel caught a rut and the axle snapped. Kai dismounted. He walked to the edge of the cliff and looked down. Far below, the skeletal remains of a wagon lay wedged between two boulders. The wood was bleached gray by a year of sun, but the iron rims of the wheels were still rusted red. Kai did not look at the wagon. He looked at the rock face of the trail. He knelt, running his fingers over the stone. "No rut," he said. He moved to the canyon wall on the inside of the turn. He brushed away a layer of fresh sand blown in by the storm. "Look," he said. Evelyn dismounted and knelt beside him. There, etched deep into the sandstone, were long, jagged gouges. Metal on stone. Kai interpreted. Not a wheel rim, a wheel rolls. This was dragged out. He stood up and walked a few paces back, scanning the ground. He climbed a few feet up the rocky slope overlooking the bend. He pulled his knife and dug something out of a crevice where it had been wedged, protected from the elements. He came back and held it out to her. It was a brass shell casing. "A .44 caliber," Kai said. "Henry rifle?" Evelyn stared at the brass cylinder. "Cal owned a Winchester and a shotgun." "And Crow carries Henry," Kai said flatly. "They didn't just push him. Evelyn, they staged it. They dragged the wagon to the edge to make the tracks look like a slide, and they shot the horses to make them go over." Evelyn took the casing. It was cold and heavy. This was the bullet that had likely killed one of their team horses, or perhaps Cal himself. She felt a scream building in her throat. A year of suppressed rage and sorrow bubbling up like lava. But she did not scream. She closed her hand around the casing until her knuckles turned white. "He was murdered," she said. The word was not a question anymore. It was a verdict. "Yes," Kai said. "For water, for land." Evelyn stood up. She looked out over the vast emptiness of the territory. She did not cry. Her eyes were dry and hard as flint. "I want them to pay," she said. "Not with money. I want them to pay with everything they have." "They will," Kai promised. They turned the horses back toward San Philip. The ride back was urgent. They had the evidence. They had the testimony of Thomas Vale, provided they could find him before he left for Santa Fe. They had the truth, but the enemy had moved first. As they approached the boundary of Evelyn's land, just as the sun was beginning to dip into the afternoon haze, they saw it. Nailed to the trunk of the large cottonwood tree that marked the entrance to her property was a piece of paper. A knife pinned it to the bark. Kai rode up and pulled the knife free. He handed the paper to Evelyn. It was not a foreclosure notice. It was a message scrawled in hasty, jagged pencil. "The boy talked before we caught him. We have him at the ice house. Bring the paper he gave you. Come alone, or the clerk hangs for theft." Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. "Tomas." "They caught him." "He didn't make the stagecoach," Kai said grimly. "He is just a boy," Evelyn said, her voice shaking. "He tried to help me, and now they are using him to break you," Kai said. "They want the page with the codes. Without that, and without Tomas to explain it, the casing and the marks on the cliff are just stories. If we give them the paper, we lose the proof," Evelyn said. "We lose the land. And if we do not, the boy dies," Kai said. He looked at her. It was a terrible choice. The land represented her past, her husband, her independence. The boy represented the innocent life caught in the gears of Rusk's machine. "We cannot let him die," Evelyn said immediately. Kai nodded, a fierce pride in his eyes. "No, we cannot. But I will not give Rusk the satisfaction of winning," she added. "There has to be another way." "There is," Kai said. He looked toward the town, his expression hardening into a mask of war. "We do not play their game. They want a trade in the dark. No, we give them a war in the light." "What do you mean?" "Crow expects us to sneak into the ice house," Kai said. "He expects fear. He expects a widow and a savage to beg." He checked the load in his revolver, spinning the cylinder. "Tomorrow is Sunday," Kai said. "The whole town will be at the church meeting hall. The judge, the preacher, the women who whisper about you. And Rusk," Evelyn realized. "He never misses a service. He likes to be seen in the front pew. We go there, Kai said. We take the truth to the altar. We force Rusk to open his books in the house of his god. But Tomas, I will get Tomas. Kai said, while you walk into that church and make Rusk look at you, I will take the boy from the ice house. That is suicide, Evelyn said, grabbing his arm. Crow will be guarding him. Crow will be watching you, Kai corrected. He will be waiting for you to bring the paper. He will not expect the wolf at his back door. They rode the rest of the way to the way station in silence. When they arrived, the shadows were long and purple. Evelyn stopped at the porch steps. Her breath caught in her throat. Hanging from the beam of her porch, the porch Cal had built with his own hands, was a rope, a thick, heavy lariat tied into a hangman's noose. It swayed gently in the evening breeze, a grotesque pendulum counting down the time. It was a message. Give up, or this is next. Kai dismounted, his hand going to his knife, but Evelyn stopped him. No, she said. She walked up the steps. She did not run. She walked with a slow, deliberate cadence. She reached up and grabbed the coarse hemp of the noose. She pulled it down, jerking the knot loose from the beam. She carried the rope to the fire pit in the yard, where the embers of the morning fire were still warm. She threw the rope onto the ashes. She struck a match on the sole of her boot and tossed it onto the hemp. The dry rope caught instantly, curling and blackening, the flames licking up like hungry tongues. She watched it burn. She watched the symbol of her intimidation turn to ash and smoke. I am not afraid of them, Evelyn said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of iron. I am not afraid of the debt. I am not afraid of the rope. I am done being the victim. Kai stood on the other side of the fire, the flames illuminating the sharp planes of his face. He looked at her not as a woman he needed to protect, but as a warrior he was proud to stand beside. The freedom of the West. Kai said softly, it is not about doing whatever you want. It is about paying the price for what you believe is right. I am ready to pay, Evelyn said. Whatever it costs. Kai walked around the fire. He stopped in front of her. He reached out and brushed a smudge of soot from her cheek. His touch was electric, grounding her. Get some rest, Evelyn, he said. Tomorrow, the storm breaks for good. And you, she asked. I will be watching, he said. I will be the shadow until it is time to be the blade. He looked deep into her eyes. For a moment, the rugged warrior dropped his guard completely. Tomorrow, either you lose your land or they lose their face, Kai said, his voice ringing with the finality of a gavel strike. I will not leave you alone. He turned and walked into the darkness to guard the perimeter, leaving Evelyn standing by the fire, watching the last of the hangman's noose crumble into gray dust. She was ready. Let the morning come. The heavy oak doors of the San Felipe Mercantile stood open, allowing the stagnant Sunday heat to mingle with the scents of dry goods and leather within. It was noon, the hour Silas Rusk had appointed for the public humiliation of Evelyn Hart. The townspeople had gathered, spilling from the church steps across the street to form a murmuring semicircle around the store's entrance. They were there to witness the final act of a tragedy they had all predicted. The widow losing her home. Inside, Silas Rusk stood behind his polished mahogany counter, looking like a king presiding over a court of dust and flies. Deputy Harlan Crow leaned against a support beam near the cracker barrel, his hand resting casually on the pearl handle of his revolver. A smug grin plastered beneath his mustache. Evelyn walked through the crowd. She did not look at her feet. She looked straight ahead, her spine as rigid as a rifle barrel. She wore her best dress, a dark blue cotton that had seen better years, but she had brushed it until it looked dignified. She was not coming to beg. Kai Yazzie walked beside her. The crowd parted for him, not out of respect, but out of a primal wariness. He moved with a silence that was louder than the boots of the men around him. He carried a heavy leather saddlebag over one shoulder. They reached the counter. Rusk smiled, a predator baring his teeth. Mrs. Hart, Rusk said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. You are prompt. I admire that. It makes the inevitable unpleasantness go faster. There will be no unpleasantness, Mr. Rusk, Evelyn said. Her voice was steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. We are here to conclude our business. Excellent, Rusk said. He opened the large master ledger on the counter, turning it to face the crowd. The debt stands at $3,420. Do you have the deed to the land or perhaps the keys to the station? Kai stepped forward. He swung the heavy saddlebag off his shoulder and let it drop onto the counter. It hit the wood with a solid, heavy thud that made the glass jars of candy rattle on the shelves. The room went silent. Kai reached into the bag. He did not pull out a weapon. He pulled out a stack of banknotes, tied with twine, then another, then a heavy canvas sack that clinked with the unmistakable sound of gold coins. Count it, Kai said. Rusk stared at the money. His smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion that quickly hardened into suspicion. He reached out and untied the sack. He poured a stream of gold double eagles onto the counter. He thumbed through the notes. Where did a drifter get this kind of capital? Crow growled, stepping away from the beam. Stole it, most likely. It is dine trading money, Kai said, his voice cutting through the room. Silver and turquoise traded for gold in Santa Fe. It is honest money, which is more than I can say for the man holding it. Rusk's face flushed a deep, angry red. He counted quickly, his fingers twitching. He wanted it to be short. He wanted to find a discrepancy. But the pile was precise. It is all there, Rusk admitted through gritted teeth. He shoved the money toward his strongbox. Fine, the debt is cleared. You have bought her another few months. Boy, but a widow running that station alone will fail eventually. I can wait. Rusk began to close the ledger. Business is concluded. Get out of my store. We are not done, Kai said. He placed his hand flat on the ledger, preventing Rusk from closing it. The contrast between Kai's scarred, brown hand and Rusk's manicured, pale fingers was stark. I have paid the debt, Kai said, his voice rising so that the people outside could hear. But paying a debt does not mean accepting an insult. Now, we check the books. You have no right, Rusk snapped. The money is paid. The account is closed. The account is fraudulent, Evelyn said. She stepped up beside Kai. You charged my husband for goods he never received. You charged him on dates when he was already dead. Slander, Rusk shouted. Crow, remove them. Crow pushed off the wall, his hand dropping to his gun. You heard the man. Get out, or you go to jail. We go nowhere, Kai said. Not until the town sees the truth. Kai whistled, a sharp, piercing sound. From the back storeroom entrance, the door kicked open. The crowd gasped. Thomas Vale stumbled into the light. He was not walking under his own power. He was leaning heavily against the doorframe, his face a mask of bruises, his lips split and bleeding, but he was alive. Crow's eyes went wide. How? You left 2 men to guard him at the ice house, Kai said coldly. They are currently sleeping very deeply. Thomas, come here. Thomas limped forward. He looked terrified, his eyes darting between Rusk and Crow. But when he saw Evelyn, he straightened up. He saw the resolve in her face, and he found a scrap of his own courage. Thomas, Evelyn said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage as she saw the blood on his shirt. Tell them. He keeps 2 books, Thomas stammered, his voice thick from his swollen lip. He pointed a shaking finger at Rusk. That big one on the counter is for the bank. It is a lie. He has another one. A real one. The boy is delirious, Rusk shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. He is a thief and a liar. I fired him yesterday for stealing from the till. He is not lying, Kai said. Kai reached into his pocket and pulled out the turquoise bead. He held it up. It caught the shaft of sunlight streaming through the open door, glowing with an intense, electric blue. He tossed it onto the counter. It skittered across the wood and spun to a halt on top of the open ledger page, right on the entry dated October the 12th. This stone, Kai said, his voice booming now. Was in Calvin Hart's pocket when he was buried. I gave it to him years ago. It is a spirit bead. You wrote that he bought saddles on the 12th, but on the 10th, he was already cold. You forged the signature. Rusk. But you forgot that dead men do not shop. The crowd began to murmur. The sound grew louder, a buzzing of angry bees. They looked at the bead. They looked at Rusk's sweating face. He probably bought them earlier, Rusk stammered, sweat beading on his upper lip. I just recorded it late. It is a clerical error. And the second book? Kai asked. Is that a clerical error too? Kai turned to Thomas. Where is it? Thomas. Thomas reached into his shirt. He winced in pain, his ribs likely bruised or broken, but he pulled out a slim, battered notebook. Here, Thomas whispered. I took it from the floor safe before Crow dragged me away. Rusk's eyes bulged. He lunged across the counter, clawing for the book. Give me that! But Evelyn was faster. She snatched the book from Thomas's hand before Rusk could touch it. Crow! Rusk screamed. Shoot him! Shoot the thief! Crow panicked. The situation was spiraling out of control. The crowd was turning. He drew his revolver, leveling it not at Kai, who was too dangerous, but at the weakest link, Thomas. Drop it! Crow yelled, his finger tightening on the trigger. Kai moved. He did not draw a weapon. He launched himself across the gap between them, a blur of motion. He slammed into Crow just as the hammer fell. Boom! The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Wood splinters exploded from the support column a foot above Evelyn's head. The crowd screamed and surged back. Kai and Crow crashed into a display of canned peaches, sending metal tins rolling across the floor. They grappled on the ground, a tangle of limbs and dust. Crow was strong, fueled by panic, but Kai was fighting with the cold, calculated fury of a warrior. Crow tried to bring the gun around, but Kai trapped the cylinder with his left hand, jamming the mechanism with his right hand. Kai delivered a short, brutal strike to Crow's jaw. Crow's head snapped back, and his eyes rolled up. He went limp. Kai rose. He kicked the gun away, sending it sliding across the floor to stop at the boots of the town preacher. Silence fell again, heavier than before. The violence had been sudden and decisive. Evelyn stood in the center of the room. She held the small notebook in her hands. She was shaking, but not from fear. She was shaking with the force of the truth she held. She opened the book. Read it, Kai said, his chest heaving slightly as he stood over the unconscious deputy. Read it to them. Evelyn. Evelyn found the page. Her voice rang out, clear and strong, cutting through the dusty air. Account of Calvin Hart, she read. August 1st, 1882. Note target property has water rights required for railway expansion. Hart refuses to sell. Strategy leverage debt, inflate supply costs. If resistance continues, initiate accident protocol. She looked up. Her eyes burned into Silas Rusk. Accident protocol, she repeated. You planned to kill him 2 months before he died. The town of San Felipe stared at Silas Rusk. For years, they had feared him. They had owed him. They had let him rule them because they thought he was the law of money. Now, they saw a murderer in a fancy suit. It is a fabrication, Rusk shrieked, backing away until he hit the shelves behind him. She wrote it, her and that savage. They are conspiring against a white man. Are you going to let a woman and an Indian destroy your leading citizen? He looked to the crowd for support. He looked to the men he had loaned money to. He looked at the women he had charmed. No one moved to help him. Old Ben Kincaid stepped forward from the doorway, a heavy iron pry bar in his hand. Leading citizen. Ben spat on the floor. You are a vulture, Silas, and I reckon we are tired of being the carrion. Deputy Rusk yelled at the unconscious form of Crow. Wake up, arrest them. He cannot hear you, Kai said. He stepped toward the counter. Rusk shrank back. The law will handle you, Rusk. Kai said, but not your law, the real law. Two men from the crowd ranchers who had likely been cheated by Rusk in the past stepped in and grabbed Rusk by the arms. dragging him out from behind his fortress of a counter. He kicked and screamed, his dignity evaporating like water on a hot skillet. Evelyn lowered the book. She felt a sudden wave of exhaustion, the adrenaline draining out of her. She looked at Thomas, who had slumped into a chair, grinning through his bloody lip. Then she looked at Kai. He stood amidst the wreckage of the fight, the dust settling on his shoulders. He looked wild and dangerous, yet he was the only thing in the room that made sense to her. He walked over to her. He did not touch her. He stopped a foot away, respecting the space, respecting the eyes of the town that were now fixed on them. The crowd watched. They expected the drifter to take the money back. They expected him to ride off. That was what drifters did. Kai looked down at the pile of gold and notes on the counter. "I have paid the debt of Calvin Hart," Kai said. His voice was soft now, meant only for her, though the silence of the room carried it to the rafters. "The ledger is closed. You are free." Evelyn looked at him. "You gave everything you had. Money is just metal," Kai said. "It does not beat in your chest." He took a breath. He looked at her hands, still clutching the damnable book that had almost destroyed her, and then up to her face, sun-kissed and streaked with soot. "I have cleared the debt of the past," Kai said, "but there is the matter of the future." He reached out and gently took the book from her hands, setting it aside on the counter. He took her hand in his. His grip was warm, rough, and incredibly steady. "I do not buy people, Evelyn Hart," Kai said, "and I do not own what I cannot earn." He looked straight into her eyes, stripping away the barriers of race, of history, of the gossip that would surely follow. "I have paid his debt," Kai repeated. "But for yours, for your heart, I do not buy. I ask." The room held its breath. "I ask for your hand." Kai said, "Not to lead you, but to stand beside you. Evelyn Hart, will you allow me to stand with you?" It was a question that defied every convention of the West. A Navajo warrior asking a white widow for partnership, for love, in the middle of a wrecked store. Evelyn looked at him. She saw the man who had stood between her and Crow, the man who had covered her in the rain, the man who had ridden into hell to save a boy he didn't know, just because it was right. She squeezed his hand. "You do not have to ask to stand where you already are." "Kai," she said, her voice clear and loud enough for every soul in San Felipe to hear. "Yes, I will stand with you." Kai did not smile, but the tension around his eyes broke. He lifted her hand and pressed it briefly to his forehead, a gesture of profound respect and gratitude. "Then let them look," Kai said softly. Outside, the sound of the blacksmith's hammer began again, ringing out across the town. It sounded different now. It didn't sound like a cage being built. It sounded like chains being broken. The sheriff, who had conveniently been absent during Rusk's reign but had suddenly appeared now that the wind had changed, pushed through the crowd. He looked at Crow, unconscious on the floor. And Rusk, being held by the ranchers? "Looks like I have some paperwork to do," the sheriff muttered. He looked at Evelyn and Kai. "You two done here?" Evelyn looked at Rusk, who was now weeping, begging for mercy. She looked at the gold on the counter. "Yes, Sheriff," Evelyn said. "We are done. The debt is paid in full." She took Kai's arm. They walked out of the mercantile, out of the shadows, and into the blinding, beautiful light of the New Mexico afternoon. The crowd parted for them, and this time, no one whispered. They just watched the woman who wouldn't break and the warrior who had paid her price, walking side by side down the center of the street. The dust did not settle over San Felipe in a single day. The arrest of Silas Rusk and Deputy Harlan Crow had been a thunderclap that shattered the stagnant air of the town. But the echoes rolled on long after the sheriff had locked the iron bar of the jail cell. The townspeople did not suddenly embrace Evelyn Hart with open arms. Human nature, hardened by the sun and wind of the territory, was not so malleable. There were no parades, no apologies from the women who had crossed the street to avoid her shadow. Instead, there was a quiet, wary recalibration. The sneers and the open mockery vanished, replaced by a silence that was thick with calculation. They looked at her now not as the widow who was about to break, but as the woman who had brought down the mountain. They stepped aside when she walked down the boardwalk, tipping their hats with a stiff, begrudging respect. Fear was a potent form of currency in the West, and Evelyn Hart had proven she was rich in it. 3 days after the confrontation at the Mercantile, the town was still buzzing, though the volume had lowered to a hum. Evelyn stood behind the counter of her weigh station, wiping down the wood with a rag that smelled of lemon oil. The door opened, and Marion Boone walked in. The saloon owner looked tired, the lines around her eyes etched deep by years of smiling when she didn't mean it. But today her expression was unguarded. "Coffee," Marion said, dropping onto a stool. "Black, and strong enough to float a horseshoe." Evelyn poured a cup from the enamel pot on the stove. "It is quiet today, Marion." "It is the quiet of people eating their own words," Marion said, blowing on the steam. "The taste is bitter. I reckon Thomas Vale is over at the sheriff's office giving a deposition. That boy is singing like a canary. He is telling the judge everything, the double books, the bribes, the land grabs. Rusk will be lucky if he does not hang." "I do not want him to hang," Evelyn said softly. "I just want him gone." "He is done," Marion promised. She looked at Evelyn over the rim of her cup. "You did good, Evelyn. Most people would have taken the train back east. You stayed. You fought." "I had help." Evelyn glanced out the window toward the corral, where Kai was repairing a section of fence. "Help is only good if you have the spine to use it," Marion said. She reached out and covered Evelyn's hand with her own. "You did not win because you had a warrior. Evelyn, you won because you did not kneel. That is what scares them. A woman standing up looks too much like a revolution." Marion finished her coffee and left, leaving the scent of lavender water and stale tobacco in her wake. Evelyn watched her go, then untied her apron. She had one more debt to pay, not with money, but with truth. She walked out to the small rise behind the house, beneath the shade of a twisted mesquite tree. There was a mound of earth there, settled now after a year of rain and wind. A wooden cross, bleached gray, marked the head. Evelyn knelt in the dirt. She did not bring flowers. Flowers died in an hour in this heat. She brought a stone. It was a simple river rock she had found near the creek, smooth and heavy. "I know now. Cal," she whispered. For a year, she had mourned a tragedy. She had mourned an accident. Now, she mourned a crime. The knowledge that he had been murdered, that his last moments had been filled with fear and betrayal, was a fresh wound. It hurt sharper than the loss itself. "I am sorry I was not there," she said, her voice catching. "I am sorry you were alone in the dark." She cried then. It was not the hysterical weeping of the funeral, nor the exhausted sobbing of the nights when the debt loomed like a monster. It was a clean, purging rain. She cried for the man he was, and for the man he never got to be. She cried for the innocence that San Philip had stripped from both of them. When she was done, she wiped her face with her sleeve. She placed the river rock at the base of the wooden cross. It was an anchor. It said, "I remember." "Rest now," Evelyn said. "The debt is paid. The land is safe." She stood up. The wind dried the tears on her cheeks instantly. She felt lighter, as if she had set down a pack she had been carrying for miles. She walked back down the hill. Kai was waiting for her by the corral. He had seen her go up to the grave, and he had respected her need for solitude. But he had watched. He always watched. He was working on the gate, replacing a rotted hinge. His movements were precise, economic. He did not waste energy. When she approached, he stopped and took off his hat, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "The hinge is fixed," Kai said. "It will hold against the wind now." "Thank you," Evelyn said. Kai looked at the house, then at the horizon. He seemed restless, like a hawk that had sat too long on a fence post. "The trial for Rusk will be next month." Kai said, "The judge is coming from Santa Fe. You'll be safe until then. The town is afraid to touch you." "Safe," Evelyn repeated. "That is a strange word to use out here." "I should go," Kai said. The words hung in the air, heavy and sudden. Evelyn felt a jolt in her chest. "Go," she asked. "Go where?" "Away," Kai said. He looked down at his boots, then met her eyes with brutal honesty. "I have stayed too long already. A dying warrior living at the station of a white widow. People are talking. Evelyn, they whisper. Rusk is gone, but the hate is not. It is in the soil." "Let them talk," Evelyn said. "It is not just talk." Kai stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. "I am a stain on your reputation. As long as I am here, you will be an outcast. You saved your land. Evelyn, do not lose your place in the world because of me." He was giving her a way out. He was offering to disappear, to let her be the heroic widow who had been helped by a mysterious stranger, restoring her to the good graces of white society. It was a noble offer. It was a sacrificial offer. Evelyn looked at him. She looked at the scar on his cheek, the dark depth of his eyes, the hands that had held a gun to save a boy and a blanket to warm her. "My place in the world?" Evelyn said slowly. "You think my place is with them, with the people who watched me starve, with the people who laughed when the sheriff posted the notice?" "They are your people," Kai said. "No," Evelyn said. She stepped into his space, closing the distance he had so carefully maintained. "A person's people are the ones who stand with them in the fire. You stood." "Evelyn." "Do not leave to save me, Kai Yazi," she said fiercely. "I do not need saving anymore. I need something real." She reached out and took his hand. It was rough, calloused, warmer than the sun. "If you want to go because you do not want to be here, then go," she said. "Ride out. I will not stop you. But if you are going because you think you are protecting me from whispers, then you are a fool. I do not want a savior who leaves when the work is done. I want a man who stays." Kai stared at her. He searched her face for any sign of hesitation, any sign that she was saying this out of obligation or fear of being alone. He found none. He found only the steel that had faced down Silas Rusk. "I am not an easy man to be with," Kai said softly. "I carry ghosts." "My house is full of them," Evelyn replied. "We can make room." Kai turned his hand over and gripped hers. "I will stay. Not as a wall to hide behind, but as a man." "Good," Evelyn said. Her heart was beating fast, a rhythm of hope. "Now, come inside. The stew is ready, and old Ben is coming to fix the front door." The afternoon passed into evening. The rhythm of the station began to return, but it was a new rhythm. Old Ben Kincaid came by with his tools, whistling a tuneless song as he rehung the heavy oak door that Crow had nearly kicked in. He ate a bowl of stew with them, treating Kai with the gruff camaraderie of one working man to another. "The door is as solid as a bank vault now," Ben said, wiping his mouth. "Better. Actually, banks get robbed. This door stays shut." He left as the sun began to set, painting the sky in violent streaks of crimson and violet. Evelyn and Kai sat on the porch. The air was cooling, the crickets beginning their nightly chorus. It was a scene of domestic peace that felt almost stolen. But the West did not give up its grudges easily. The smell hit them first. It was not the sweet smell of wood smoke from the hearth. It was the acrid, oily smell of kerosene. Kai stood up instantly, sniffing the air. Smoke. He looked toward the barn. A flicker of orange light danced behind the slat windows of the hayloft. "The barn!" Evelyn shouted, springing from her chair. "Stay here," Kai ordered, vaulting over the railing. "No!" Evelyn ran after him. "The horses are in there!" They ran across the yard. The fire was moving fast, fed by the dry hay and the accelerant that had been splashed across the back wall. By the time they reached the double doors, the loft was fully engulfed. The roar of the flames sounded like a freight train. Inside, the horses were screaming. It was a terrible, high-pitched sound of pure terror. Kai kicked the doors open. Smoke billowed out, thick and black, stinging the eyes and choking the breath. "Get the paint," Kai yelled, wrapping his bandana around his face. "I will get the others." He dove into the smoke. Evelyn did not hesitate. She ran toward Bess's stall. The old mare was thrashing, kicking the wooden gate, her eyes rolling white in the gloom. The heat was intense, a physical weight pressing down on them. Burning hay rained down from the loft above, sparking on the dry straw of the floor. Evelyn reached the stall. She fumbled with the latch, her fingers slick with sweat. "Easy, Bess, easy," she coughed, the smoke searing her throat. The latch gave way. Evelyn grabbed the halter. Bess reared, almost striking her, but Evelyn held on. She used her weight to pull the mare's head down, shouting commands over the roar of the fire. "Come on," she screamed. She dragged the terrified animal out of the stall and toward the rectangle of light that was the door. Kai was already there, leading 2 of the guest horses out. He slapped their rumps, sending them galloping into the safety of the corral. He turned back. "Evelyn, I have her." Evelyn shouted, stumbling out into the yard with Bess. She let the horse go and bent over, coughing violently. The air outside felt cool and sweet. "Is that all of them?" Kai asked, gripping her shoulders. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes wild. "Yes," Evelyn gasped. "The tack, the saddles—" "Leave them," Kai said. "Look." He pointed to the roof. The structure groaned, the timber beams surrendering to the heat. With a massive crash, the roof collapsed inward, sending a geyser of sparks high into the night sky. If they had been in there 10 seconds longer, they would have been buried. They stood watching the barn burn. It was a total loss. The hay, the winter feed, the structure itself all gone in minutes. In the shadows beyond the firelight, 2 riders spurred their horses and galloped away into the darkness. Rusk's last loyal dogs, delivering a parting bite. Kai made a move to run for his horse, to chase them down. But Evelyn grabbed his arm. "No," she said. "Let them go. They burned your livelihood." Kai snarled, his chest heaving. "They burned a building." Evelyn said. She looked at the horses safe in the corral. She looked at Kai, alive and standing beside her. "They wanted to break us. They wanted us to despair. Look at me, Kai." He turned to her. The firelight danced in his eyes. "We are standing," Evelyn said. "We are alive. This is just wood and hay. We can rebuild wood. We cannot rebuild this." She placed her hand on his chest, over his heart. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a fierce, protective intensity. He looked at the soot on her face, the singed hem of her dress. "You ran into the fire," he said. "You were in there." She replied simply. He pulled her to him then. It was not a gentle embrace. It was hard and desperate. The embrace of 2 people who had looked death in the face and said not today. He held her tight against him, and she buried her face in his shoulder, smelling the smoke and the sweat and the man. They stood there while the barn burned down to embers. The destruction was absolute, yet strangely impotent. The fire had taken the structure, but it had forged something harder between them. Trust was no longer a theory. It had been tempered in heat. The next morning, the air smelled of wet ash. The barn was a skeleton of charred beams. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table. In front of her lay the small notebook Tomas had given her the real ledger, and beside it, the false ledger Rusk had kept. She picked up the false ledger. The leather was cool. This book had held her captive for a year. It had been the chain around her neck. She ripped the cover off. The sound was loud in the quiet kitchen. She tore out the pages one by one. She walked to the hearth where a small cooking fire crackled. She fed the pages to the flames. She watched the lies turn brown, then black, then dissolve into gray ash. The debt, the interest, the threats, all of it, smoke up the chimney. When she was done, she took a single sheet of blank paper from her stationery box. She placed it on the table. "What is that?" Kai asked, entering from the back door. He had been washing the soot off the horses. "A new page," Evelyn said. "No debts, no lies, just what we choose to write." She looked at him. "Breakfast is ready." The days that followed settled into a rhythm that was slower, deeper. They did not rush to rebuild the barn immediately. They cleared the debris together, working side by side in the sun. They spoke less, but said more. A glance across the yard was a conversation. A touch on the shoulder was a paragraph. Evelyn noticed the way Kai looked at the land. He did not look at it as property. He looked at it as a living thing. He taught her to listen to the wind in the cottonwoods, to tell the difference between the cry of a hawk and the cry of an eagle. One evening, a week after the fire, Kai came to her on the porch. He was dressed in his riding clothes, his hair tied back with a fresh leather thong. "I want you to ride with me tomorrow," he said. "Where?" Evelyn asked. "To the canyon of the Chaco." Kai said, "To see my grandmother, Grandmother Ashki." Evelyn felt a flutter of nervousness. "Your family." "She is the matriarch," Kai said. "She holds the history. She knew Cal. She knows I am here." "Why do you want me to meet her?" Evelyn asked. Does she need to approve?" Kai shook his head. A small, rare smile touched his lips. "No one approves of Grandmother Ashki. She sees what is. I want you to meet her because you are part of my story now, Evelyn, and I am part of yours. To understand the tree, you must see the roots." It was an invitation into his world. He had fought for her and hers. Now he was asking her to step into his. "I would be honored," Evelyn said. "We leave at dawn." Kai said, "It is a long ride." "I am used to long rides." Evelyn smiled. "Yes," Kai said, looking at the scar on her arm from the night in the canyon. "You are." That night, Evelyn slept soundly. The house was quiet. The barn was a ruin, but the foundation was strong. Outside, the wind blew across the New Mexico territory. No longer a threat, but a song. She was a widow who had lost a husband, but she was a woman who had found a life. And tomorrow, she would ride to meet the ancestors of the man who stood guard at her door. The wedding of Evelyn Hart and Kai Yazzie did not stop the rotation of the earth, nor did it cause the sun to pause in its track across the New Mexico sky. It was a Tuesday in late October, a day chosen simply because the wind had died down and the work on the new barn frame was far enough along to spare an afternoon. There were no satin ribbons tied to the hitching posts. There was no organ music swelling from the church across town. The ceremony took place on the front porch of the way station, the very spot where the foreclosure notice had once been slapped down like a gauntlet. Evelyn wore a dress of pale dove gray. It was not new, but she had sewn fresh lace onto the cuffs and collar, lace she had bought from the mercantile, now run by an interim manager appointed by the court. She wore no veil. She wanted to see the world clearly, and she wanted the world to see her. Her face was open, her chin lifted, her eyes bright, not with the giddy naivety of a girl, but with the calm certainty of a woman who has walked through fire and come out tempered. Kai stood waiting for her. He had traded his travel-worn leather vest for a clean black coat, though he still wore his moccasins and the turquoise necklace his grandmother had given him during their visit to the canyon. He did not look like a man trying to be white. He looked like a man who was comfortable in his own skin, regardless of the clothes that covered it. The guests were few, but they were the ones who mattered. Marion Boone stood to the side, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief and trying to pretend it was just dust. Old Ben Kincaid leaned against the porch railing, looking scrubbed and uncomfortable in a stiff collar, but smiling broadly. Thomas Vale sat in a chair, still favoring his healing ribs, a ledger the honest kind resting on his knee as if it were a Bible. The preacher, a man who had been hesitant at first to marry a white widow to a Navajo warrior, had been persuaded by a combination of Evelyn's steely gaze and the sudden, mysterious donation of a new roof for the rectory paid for, rumor had it, by the sale of a certain gold nugget Kai had carried for years. "We are gathered here," the preacher began, his voice competing with the chirping of a meadowlark, "to join this man and this woman." He went through the liturgy, the words familiar and worn smooth by centuries of use. But when it came time for the vows, Kai and Evelyn had written their own. They did not speak of obeying or of wealth. Those things felt small in the face of the vast desert. Kai took Evelyn's hands. His grip was warm and rough, the hands of a man who built and protected. "I have walked many miles alone," Kai said. His voice was low, a rumble that vibrated in the quiet air. "I have fought battles that had no names. I do not promise easily. Evelyn, words are like clouds. They change shape, but action is the stone. He looked deep into her eyes, stripping away everything else in the world. I promise to stand, Kai said. When the wind blows, I will be the shelter. When the fire comes, I will be the water. I promise to stay. Evelyn felt a tear track down her cheek, but she did not wipe it away. I have known loss, Evelyn said, her voice steady. I have known fear that eats the spirit. I do not need a savior. Kai, I need a partner. I promise to walk beside you. I promise that this home will always have a door that opens for you. I promise to stay. They did not exchange gold bands. Evelyn's fingers were too swollen from work for delicate rings, and Kai had no use for metal that bound the flesh. Instead, Evelyn tied a leather cord around Kai's wrist, and he tied a strip of woven wool around hers, red for the earth, blue for the sky. I pronounce you man and wife, the preacher said, closing his book with a snap. You may kiss. The kiss was not the desperate, adrenaline-fueled collision of the night in the canyon. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was a sealing of a pact between two sovereign nations, the nation of Kai and the nation of Evelyn. Marion let out a sob that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. About time, she muttered. The reception was a meal served at the long wooden table in the common room. There was roast venison, corn pudding, and a cake Marion had baked that leaned slightly to the left but tasted of sugar and cinnamon. They ate and they talked. There was no awkwardness, because the people in that room had seen the worst of each other and the best. They had seen cowardice and courage. There was nothing left to hide. To the Harts, Ben said, raising a glass of cider. To Evelyn Hart and Kai Yazzie. Evelyn corrected gently. She had decided to keep her name. It was the name on the deed. It was the name Cal had given her. While Cal was gone, the history was hers. Kai understood. He did not need her to take his name to know she was with him. In the Dine way. A woman owned her home and her identity. He was not acquiring a possession. He was joining a life. To Evelyn and Kai, Ben amended, grinning. The stubborn mule team in the territory. Laughter filled the room, chasing away the ghosts of the empty months. In the weeks that followed, the town of San Felipe began to change. It was not a sudden conversion. The men who had spat on the ground when Kai walked by did not suddenly invite him to poker games. The women who had shunned Evelyn did not bring casseroles to her door. But the aggression stopped. The trial of Silas Rusk had been swift. The judge from Santa Fe, a man with a face like a dried apple and no patience for frontier nonsense, had looked at the two ledgers and sentenced Rusk to 20 years in the territorial prison. Deputy Crow, having recovered from his jaw injury, had fled west before the trial, likely to find another tin star in a town that didn't ask questions. With the predator gone, the prey could breathe. When Evelyn walked into town to buy supplies, men stepped off the boardwalk to let her pass. They tipped their hats. Morning, Mrs. Hart, they would say. And then, seeing the tall, silent figure walking a step behind her, they would nod. Mr. Yazzie. It was a begrudging respect, born of the realization that this couple could not be broken. In the West, strength was the only virtue that truly mattered. Evelyn and Kai had stood in the fire and not burned. That commanded a difference that money could not buy. Thomas Vale used the reward money he received for testifying to rent a small office next to the post office. He painted a sign T, Vale, public accountant, honest books for honest men. He became the town's conscience. Farmers and ranchers brought him their receipts, their loan agreements, their worries. Tomas checked every number twice. He ensured that no one else in San Felipe would ever lose their land to a trick of the pen. It was a small justice, but it spread like ripples in a pond. The town became a little harder to cheat, a little straighter in its spine. Winter came to the high desert. It came with biting winds and snow that dusted the red rocks like powdered sugar. The way station was warm. The new barn, raised by Kai and Ben with help from a few of the local ranchers who wanted to stay on Evelyn's good side, was sturdy and tight. The smell of fresh pine and hay filled the air. replacing the memory of smoke. Evelyn and Kai worked side by side. They repaired the corrals. They cooked meals for the travelers who still came down the merchant trail. The travelers were different now. They didn't treat Evelyn like a desperate widow or Kai like a servant. They treated them as the proprietors of the best stop in the territory. One evening, after the last guest had been fed and the dishes washed, Evelyn and Kai sat on the porch. The air was crisp, but they were wrapped in buffalo robes, sitting in rocking chairs that creaked in a comfortable rhythm. The sun was setting, painting the sky in impossible shades of violet and bruised gold. The wind rushed through the dry grass, a sound like the earth breathing. Evelyn reached into her pocket. She pulled out the turquoise bead. She had carried it every day since the trial. It had been worn smooth by her thumb. She reached over and took Kai's hand. She placed the bead in his palm and closed his fingers over it. "You gave this to Cal," Evelyn said softly, "to pay the debt of life." Kai looked at her. The firelight from the window cast dancing shadows on his face. "Yes, and you used it to save me," Evelyn continued, "to pay a debt of honor. The debt is gone. Evelyn," Kai said, "you owe nothing." "I know," Evelyn said. She looked out at the darkening horizon, where the first stars were beginning to prick the veil of the night. "But there is one debt left, the one we owe to ourselves." "And what is that?" "To live," Evelyn said. "To live decently. To make sure that what happened to Cal the greed, the ugliness, does not win in the end. He died because of a lie." "We live for the truth." Kai turned the bead over in his fingers. "The Dine say that a man is not dead until his name is no longer spoken. Cal brought us to this porch. He is part of the foundation." "He would have liked you," Evelyn said, a small smile touching her lips. "He would have talked your ear off about mining schemes, but he would have liked you." "I would have listened," Kai said. "And then I would have told him his wagon wheel needed grease." Evelyn laughed, a genuine, bubbling sound that rose up into the night air. It felt good to laugh about Cal. The pain was still there, like an old break in a bone that aches when it rains. But it was no longer a fresh wound. It had healed. "We should put up a new sign," Evelyn said after a moment of silence. "For the station." "Yes," Evelyn said. "Hart and Yazzie Way Station." Kai looked at her, his eyebrows raising slightly. "That will upset some people." "Let them be upset," Evelyn said, rocking back in her chair. "If they want a bed and a hot meal, they will read the sign and walk through the door. If they don't, they can sleep with the coyotes. Hart and Yazzie." Kai tested the sound of it. "It has a good rhythm." "We will run it right," Evelyn planned, her mind moving to the future. "Fair prices, clean sheets, no questions asked of those who are running, as long as they leave their trouble at the gate. A sanctuary," Kai said. "Yes," Evelyn agreed. "A place where a person is treated like a person, not a profit margin." She looked at Kai. He was watching her with that look, the look he had given her in the horse market so many months ago. The look that saw her. "You stayed," she whispered. "I promised." Kai said. He reached out and took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. The turquoise bead sat on the armrest of the chair between them, a small blue dot of history connecting the past to the future. The wind died down. The silence of the desert was vast and complete. In the distance, a coyote howled, and this time, it did not sound like a threat. It sounded like a song of the wild, untamed and free. Evelyn Hart leaned her head back and looked at the stars. She was 33 years old. She had lost a husband. She had nearly lost her home, but she had found her voice, and she had found the man who listened to it. The ledger was empty. The page was blank, and for the first time in her life, Evelyn picked up the pen of her own destiny and began to write. "It is a good night," Kai said. "Yes," Evelyn replied, squeezing his hand. "It is a good life." From inside the house, the clock on the mantel chimed the hour. 8 strikes. The day was done. The work was done. Evelyn and Kai sat on the porch for a long time, watching the moon rise over the mesa. 2 figures carved from the same stone, enduring as the earth. And finally, finally at peace. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Evelyn and Kai as much as I enjoyed telling it. It is a story about resilience, justice, and the kind of love that stands tall when the world tries to knock you down. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening to this story from. I am always amazed to see how far these tales travel. Are you listening from a busy city, a quiet farm, or somewhere in between? Let's share our thoughts and connect. If you want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this video. If you really want to support the channel and help these stories reach more people, please press the hype button. Your support means the world to me and helps keep the spirit of the West alive. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your heart open. Goodbye for now.